Tom Clark laid under the stone, destined forever to be walked on. Railroad bill, a ghost on the tracks, a man and a myth with the wind at his back. Alabama scoundrels, wild and free, outlaws roaming from the hills to the sea. Pirates, bandits, and bushwhackers too. History's shadows come into view. Bloody Bob Sims with his prophets war, preaching fire through the devil's door. And Steve Renfro with the sheriff's star. Outlaw justice never strayed far.
Down here with Country Diggers. I haven't been going out metal detecting or dump digging in a while. It's been raining all the time, and it's wet. And when it's not raining, it's wet and muddy on the ground, and it would be like that digging in the ground too. And I just wait till it dries up a bit and stops raining for a while. But anyway, I'm going to go into a new book, and there's several new books I want to go into too. On our trip, I'm going to try and get a book on each state we go through. I'm going to try and get a book on each state we go through, on the state and the people of the state, some kind of history of each state we go to. So that'll be interesting. But today I wanted to go into this book, Alabama Scoundrels, Outlaws, Pirates, Bandits, and Bushwhackers. It's by Kelly Kazek and Will Elric. And I'll be talking about Mountain Tom Clark. He was destined to be walked on. All right, stay tuned. All right, Mountain Tom Clark, destined to be walked on. Have you ever heard the phrase, "It feels like someone just walked over my grave"? It has a few meanings, but is most commonly associated with an unexplained shiver. If anyone knows how this feels, it would be one of North Alabama's most notorious villains. Outlaw Tom Clark is buried under the roadway in the middle of Tennessee Street near the City Cemetery in Florence, Alabama. The people of Florence were so pleased with the idea that they even dedicated a memorial plaque to mark the grave, which reads, "The notorious outlaw leader who boasted that no one would ever run over Tom Clark lies buried near the center of Tennessee Street, where now all who pass by do run over him." In 1872, Tom Clark, who terrorized helpless citizens during the Civil War, confessed to at least 19 murders, including a child, and was hanged with 2 companions. Although graves were already dug in a nearby field, outraged townspeople interred Clark beneath Tennessee Street, thus bringing his boast to naught. Okay. Tom Clark first came to Lauderdale County in either late 1862 or early 1863 and moved into what was known as the Blackburn Settlement north of Florence. Locals immediately gave the new man the nickname Mountain Tom Clark because there was already a Tom Clark in the area, and the stranger had come from a mountainous county. Clark was fleeing to Lauderdale County on the run from the Confederate conscription law. Clark was not in Lauderdale County long, though, before the conscription finally caught up with him. It was a cold and disagreeable day. Clark was building a stick chimney for his uncompleted house, in which his wife and child of only a few days of age were ill, when the Confederate authorities took him away from his family and enlisted him in the Confederate Army. Many who knew him say this was the breaking point from which the passions of 1,000 devils were aroused. And many even go so far as to say the man then became a demon. Clark saw no need to be in the service of the Confederate Army, and found the Confederate officers to be much too anxious for his services. So at the first opportunity, he fled the camp, making his way north to Clifton, Tennessee, where he then enlisted in the Union Army and was assigned to the 2nd Tennessee Mounted Infantry as a guard. Being a mountain man and good with a rifle, he could have been of great benefit to the Army, but his demons had other plans. When Clark enlisted in the Union Army, orders were strict and the discipline rigid. Everything was in confusion, and scouting was the order of the day. As guerrillas and bushwhackers were running amok. The standing orders at the post were to let all persons enter, but let no one under any circumstances pass outside the guard line. A gentleman in the camp spent several days observing Clark and thought him to be susceptible to being bribed into letting him leave the camp. The man gave Clark a nice pocket watch to simply turn his back as this gentleman left the camp. Unfortunately, his absence was noticed, and the officers began an investigation. Of course, they would have discovered Clark's complicity in the crime as he fled the camp, figuring that deserting would be a better outcome than facing a firing squad after a court-martial. Not long after his departure from the Union Army, Clark fell in with what many locals would call one of the worst gangs of cutthroats that ever cursed the face of the earth. People in northwest Alabama called them the Booger Gang. Many of the men were reared in the country and had served in the Confederate Army, became deserters, and then enlisted in the Federal Army, only to desert as soon as they could do so, with the accoutrements furnished to engage in a series of the most bloody and brutal murders and robberies in American history. The gang's first true act of violence was in Bainbridge, Tennessee, where Clark went to kill a man by the name of Silas Green. The outlaw had wounded Silas in an earlier fight, but Silas had escaped before Clark could end his life. So the Booger Gang descended on Bainbridge to finish the job. As the armed men were riding up to the cabin where Silas was staying, they came across 2 Confederate soldiers standing guard by the creek and shot them dead. At the cabin, Clark found another soldier near the door, and even though the soldier was pleading for his life, Clark shot him. After he fell, one of the Booger Gang saw that he was not yet dead and shot him in the chest to finish the job. The men then set fire to Silas's cabin. While that was the first recorded violent act of the outlaw's reign of terror, it was certainly not the most widely known. In April 1865, Clark and his gang paid a visit to a wealthy old man by the name of John S. Wilson, trying to learn where he kept his stash of money. Wilson refused to reveal where the money was hidden, so the gang of men led by Clark cruelly tortured him. They piled books on his chest and burned them, pouring burning coals on his feet, and when he again failed to give up the desired information, shot to death the feeble, sick old man. Matthew Willen Jr., the plantation overseer, happened to come upon the scene of the violence against Mr. Wilson, and he was shot several times and was dead before he hit the ground. The outlaws then looted the plantation, killing a young man by the name of Mr. Twitty in the process. Another young man named Foster was shot but escaped death. Clark later bragged that after these deeds, the gang members danced with glee before they rode roughshod into Florence, where they held high carnival until near the hour when ghosts ceased to walk. Over the next several months in Florence, Clark and his gang tortured several citizens. Among them were Dr. Joseph Milner and John Kakelman. Edmund Poole was also tortured and robbed, and many other outrages were perpetrated against the citizens of Florence. Eventually, the violence began to catch up with the outlaws, and two of the Booger gang were caught and shot to death by federal authorities for their many crimes. The two men were ridden out a little way from town on the military road and taken to a little ravine where a fatal volley was fired, but they had not managed to catch the gang's leader, Tom Clark. That would come 7 years later. Clark had taken refuge for several years in the mountain areas of Jackson County, but in September 1872, he was visiting Waterloo, Alabama, when someone recognized him and reported his whereabouts to Sheriff Ed Blair in Florence. The sheriff gathered a small posse and rode out to Waterloo, where they were able to capture Clark and two other men on Pettypool Hill near Grovelly Springs. The other men happened to be thieves wanted by the state of Indiana. Some legends claim Clark was wearing a woman's dress when he was arrested, but no official counts confirmed the claim. The trio was taken to the jail on Pine Street in Florence, but as expected, the men did not remain there long. On September 14, 1872, a lynch mob formed, and the outlaws were wrestled from the jail and taken a short distance to a lot on the corner of the Tom Bigby and Pine Streets. There they were all three hanged from the branches of a large sycamore tree. After the execution, the ladies of Florence went to the mayor and requested that Clark and the other men not be interred in the consecrated ground of the Florence Cemetery. The mayor agreed, and their bodies were taken to a field across from the cemetery where the two wanted Indiana men were buried. One man in the mob recalled hearing Tom Clark boasting, "No man will ever run over Tom Clark." So the lynch mob dug up the road and buried his body under Tennessee Street, just outside the gates of Florence City Cemetery, where his remains still lie. During his life, Clark was known to have killed 16 men, but there were probably more unrecorded. Before his death, though, Clark declared that of all his killings, he only regretted one, and that one murder shows the monster that Tom Clark truly was. The murder victim was a 1-year-old boy. The boy had been wearing a medallion Clark wanted, so Clark picked the boy up, impaled him with a knife, and took the medallion. Clark, like all bad men, received credit for crimes he never committed, and some that were not committed at all. But those Clark did commit were so fiendish and diabolical that a run-of-the-mill criminal would shudder with horror at the thought of them. And this is why, on that crisp fall evening in 1872, a group of terrorized citizens decided that Tom Clark and the demon inside him should eternally suffer the sensation of someone walking over his grave. Today, if you drive down Florence Boulevard, parallel to the Florence City Cemetery, you can read the marker for Mountain Man Tom Clark, but watch out for the bump in the middle of the road. Oh, what a crazy sick man. But there are no surviving, no known photographs of Tom Clark, so I can't show you a photograph of him, but I can show you the plaque up there and where he's buried. So anyway, hope you enjoyed, and see you back soon.